welcome you to this event on the state of academic publishing. This event is a collaboration between the Center for Faculty Excellence and the Institute. And I want to especially thank Soini Sengupta and Maria Lisbon. Soini is the research coordinator for Center for Faculty Excellence, and Maria is the executive director here at the Institute for Arts and Humanities, and they are the ones who pulled together this event. Let me explain a little bit about the format of what we're here to do today. Today, I wanted us to have a chance to air the full range of questions and concerns about the state of publishing, academic publishing now. I do understand, even though for the editors at the table, they think of you as potential audience, people who buy books, that probably most of you think of yourselves as potential authors, people who want to sell a book to those editors. So we will try to negotiate this gap of interest between the audience and some of our panelists. But we are hoping that this conversation will also lead to our being the Center for Faculty Excellence and the Institute for Arts and Humanities, getting a better sense from you of what things you would like us to do as organizations that are at the service of the faculty to help you with questions about publishing and preparing manuscripts for publication, etc. So please do sign up. We would like to capture your names. And please also tell me, Soini, Maria, or Eric Muller what ways the IAH and the CFE can help you as you navigate these changing waters of academic publishing. So the format today is that each of the four panelists is going to speak for 5 to 7 minutes. We really do want to leave a lot of time for conversation. And let me just quickly introduce who the four panelists are, and then I'm just going to let them take off. So I'll just go down the road here. Eric Muller is the Dan K. Moore Distinguished Professor of Law and Jurisprudence and Ethics here at UNC. He is the faculty director of the Center for Faculty Excellence, and he is an author of several books, 2 of which he has published with UNC Press. And so one of the things we wanted to do today was have an editor from each of the presses and a faculty author who has worked with each of the presses. And Eric's 2 books with UNC Press are in 2007, American Inquisition, The Hunt for Japanese American Disloyalty in World War II. And then in 2012, Colors of Confinement, which I don't have the subtitle, but it's a book of photographs of the Japanese confinement that Eric found and has published in a beautiful photography book with UNC Press. Next to Eric is John Shearer. John Shearer is now the director of UNC Press. He is a UNC, he had got an undergraduate degree here at UNC and began his career in publishing right after graduating as assistant sales manager at UNC Press. He went on to work at Henry Holt, Brookings Institution Press, and then was the VP and publisher of Basic Books from 2006 until 2012, and he's just recently come, I guess it's about 6 months now, that he's been director of UNC Press. Next to John is Sarah Sharma. Sarah is an assistant professor in communication studies here at UNC, and she has her first book in process, in production, from Duke University Press. And the title, what was the publication date?
It's fall.
Fall 2013. And the title of the book is In the Meantime, The Cultural Politics of Temporality. And next to Sarah is Courtney Berger. Courtney is an editor at Duke University Press. She has a PhD in Victorian literature from Johns Hopkins University.
My only request is that I not go first.
Thanks, Ils.
Okay. Well, since I'm going to talk a little bit about book proposals, I think it might, actually be appropriate for me to go first. So I just thought I would speak for a few minutes about what I'm looking for or what I see when a proposal crosses my desk. And the first question I ask myself is, what is this book trying to accomplish? I think that for a lot of book authors, especially first-time book authors, you know, what they're thinking is tenure. That's what it's trying to accomplish. That may be true, but there should be, of course, something more than that, at least from the publisher perspective. And so, you know, you really should have a clear idea of like what type of intervention you're trying to make, and what type of book is it. Are you telling, you know, is this a recasting in terms of, you know, historical recasting of something? Is it a theoretical intervention? What is the book trying to accomplish? And I'm always looking for that first and foremost, trying to look beyond people setting up their project to saying, well, you know, everybody else has done this and I'm correcting the rest of the world, or no one has ever covered this topic. When I see that, I think, well, is that because no one ever cared? Or because it was essential and what you're trying to show me is how essential this missing piece of history is. So I'm always looking for more of the positive contribution rather than the kind of negative setup of the book. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm looking for is, you know, who you're in conversation with. So, you know, a book is part of an ongoing scholarly conversation. You know, it's a bigger statement than an article or a tweet or a blog post or a conference paper. But it still is in active conversation with other people. So you're either, you know, conversing with people within your discipline or, you know, surrounding a particular set of theoretical questions. And that intervention doesn't have to be specifically disciplinary. For example, you know, I don't know of any ethics studies departments in existence, but at Duke, for example, that would be a very recognizable set of theoretical concerns and kind of interdisciplinary conversation. And if that is where your conversation is happening, that would make sense to us. So in terms of that conversation, I'm not really looking, when I kind of peruse the proposal, I'm not just looking for, oh, you know, these are the comparable books, you know, who my competition is. I'm looking for, who are you talking to, you know? And sometimes that can come up in really interesting ways when I see, you know, somebody saying like, these are the 3 or 4 people I feel like, you know, I'm really talking to with this book. And then the last thing is, who is this book for? And how would I, or the author, expect it to circulate? This is a very important question, obviously, from the publisher perspective. You know, I think that you have to be realistic in some ways about how books circulate. So if you say in your proposal, I expect this book to be used in every intro to American literature class ever, you know, there's going to be some skepticism on the part of an editor who says, well, you know, most intro to American literature courses don't use whole books of secondary literature, so that seems unlikely. So you really want to think about, like, who have you written this book for, and what do you expect it to do? You know, how do you expect it to circulate amongst people? Are you really writing for a specialist audience? That might be just fine if that audience wants to hear what you have to say and buys books. You know, are you writing something that's very kind of very accessible ethnography that you imagine could really be used in a wide variety of courses, undergrad and graduate, you know, level? Then that's great to know. So I'm always thinking about, like, how is this book going to circulate kind of in the short term and the long term? So those are the 3 basic points. And then just to kind of touch on some of the components of a proposal, you know, when I've been on panels like this before with other editors and heard people talk about, like, well, you know, if the letter doesn't completely, you know, give me the best picture of the book, I just move on. And I was like, well, you know, actually, that's not the way I tend to read proposals. Like, I might find the topic, I might see something in that letter, the topic, you know, that I think is really interesting, and I might just skip forward and say, okay, well, I just want to see what's in this book now. What are the chapters? You know, what's the meat of this book? So I might skip, you know, along, or I might say, this person seems really interesting. I wonder how they're positioned, and go right to the CV and see something about them. So each of the components can be quite important. So you want to think about, making sure each of them is polished. For example, with the CV, I'm not just looking like, oh, where did this person go to graduate school? I'm thinking, where are they presenting their work? Where are they publishing? And what types of conversations are they having? So if somebody is going to a variety of conferences, that might give me a sense of like, oh, okay, they're speaking to several different audiences and their work is being received there, or if they're publishing in, I'll look at the types of journals they're publishing in to get a bigger picture of how their work is being received and circulating, and just other interesting things they might be doing. So the CV can really be a useful tool in that way. The proposal, should give a very clear overview of the project, should definitely have a chapter by chapter breakdown. I find that very useful. And sometimes when I'm looking at a proposal and I'm having a hard time getting at what is that main intervention, what is this book doing, I'll skip to the end and see what the last chapter is about. And often the key to the book is there. So you really want to make sure that the proposal gives a very full picture of the project. The letter should be concise, give a concise overview of the project, and also explain where the project stands. Do you have a finished manuscript ready right now? Is it going to be ready in a few months? Are you about to attend a scholarly conference and you're hoping you might be able to set up an appointment with an editor there? What's the situation so that somebody can easily kind of get a handle on that? I think if there's anything else. And then in terms of sample chapters, each press asks for something different with a proposal. We ask people to submit 1 or 2 sample chapters if they're available. Choose the best. I guess this should go without saying. Choose the best that you've got ready. Don't send, a methods chapter that's going to be the least compelling part of your project just because you think it's the most, polished. You want to send the thing you think is the core of the book that will draw people in, because I might, as I get interested in the project and I want to see more, then you turn to the writing and you say, how do they execute this? Is this going to be compelling? How do they argue it? How do they use examples? Like, is somebody going to want to read this book? So that's just I guess, basic piece of advice is to include your best writing. And I think that's it. Was that 5 to 7 minutes? Okay.
Okay. I'm going to talk more about the review process since I just successfully came out of it alive. But the first thing I'll say is that one thing I've noticed is that there isn't one single story about how anybody's book came to be. And I think everyone's always looking for, like, so how did it happen? What did you do? And what's my next step? And I don't, like, out of all my academic friends, I can't think of 2 people that have had the same thing happen to them. So I think one way that I like to put it now to friends and others who come to me is that it's a long process of not being said no to. And what you want to keep in mind is you don't want to be said no to too fast before you deserve the no. Like sometimes a no might happen at a conference, a quick conversation with an editor, no. And I know you don't say it like that, but it's it can happen there, or it can happen when you send in an email inquiry or you send in part of the book. So it's a long process, and really the yes doesn't come, I feel, until your book goes into production, which I just went into production. So I finally feel good. So in order to prepare for this, I actually went through all my reader reports, and I worked with Ken Wissaker at Duke, and he was very wonderful to work with. But it was excruciating rereading all those. I went through, basically I had a dissertation that went through massive revision. Like it bears almost no resemblance, and part of the review process was them just beating the dissertation completely out of the book. Even I would try and put parts back in there, because as a first-time author, one of the things I think your writing method for a dissertation is get as many pages as you can, give it to your advisor, just make it look like something big, you're handing it in, and you'll worry about everything later. And so it's hard to let go of pages and pages of things that so it took me a long time to deal with that. So I did get my contract in 2008, and I'm in production, so it took a long time. I did have about a year. I just had a baby. It slowed everything, and I do not recommend having a baby and editing at all. So we can talk about that after all this. Anyhow, so what I wanted to talk about is kind of some things I wish I knew when I was navigating the review process. And one of the first things is that we are offering you a book contract. Doesn't really mean, yay, everything's great. It's not really a time to celebrate. It's actually a time to despair a little bit because all the work happens after that. This is before your reviews come in. I think the contract offers some sense of security, but what I realized later is what offered the most security was having the polished manuscript, not the contract, because you could be under contract for the rest of your life, probably, right? Do they expire?
They can, but you should celebrate getting a
Okay,
contract.
but what I mean is, I was like, woo, I'm under contract, it's 2008, and I'm still kind of waiting for my big party. So, upon receiving your first set of reader reports, I recommend that you do not stalk the internet trying to find out who your anonymous reviewers were. I did this, it's really unhealthy and unproductive, and I'm pretty sure I'm completely wrong about who they are, but you go first, you're like, who are these people, how dare they say this? I'm a professor, I can, and so you start thinking, what are their problems? Why don't they like my work? You will do this, and I would just say, do it, but don't spend too much time doing this because you'll probably be wrong. You'll never guess who they are. And so a few phrases that came up in my reviews, and I realized, or my reports, and I realized I should have had somebody guiding me along the way, or I wish I could have talked to myself. So, the author should engage with Bordeaux. This doesn't mean take 6 months, stop writing and doing anything else, and read all of Bordeaux's work. So in the end, I ended up with 2 citations that were well placed with referencing his work after 6 months of reading the canon. And I can probably teach a course on him, but I'll never be asked to do this, and I'll never be able to do this. But it's that notion that, this engage with somebody doesn't really mean stop everything you're doing. It means, check this person out. Likewise, cite so-and-so doesn't mean cite so-and-so if you would like to. That's pretty much a demand, I think. It's a really small demand, and it's a minor demand from a reviewer. And it doesn't really, if your argument's intact and everything's okay, having to cite a few extra people shouldn't be really insulting. And I think this was something, I had made some major changes to the book, and at the end I forgot to do like a few minor citations. This was just like putting in a citation, and I thought it wasn't really important anymore because I'd done the massive revision, all the heavy lifting. But I realized, I think quite often when when your book gets sent back to the readers, the first thing they might do is actually look at your bibliography to see if you took some of those suggestions, because you can see from your bibliography a changing direction in the book, or what insights that they had offered or things that you followed up on. So, and I would also say to that, reviewers are always going to have their favorite theorists, like we all do. And it doesn't really hurt a book to do anything like that. It actually just broadens your audience. So that's just one small little bit of advice. Being told something like stop relying on other theorists, chop out the huge theory passages, doesn't mean that, and this is something I hear circulating a lot, is it doesn't mean that the press or suddenly the academy is anti-theoretical. It just sort of means that you want to forefront yourself as the main theorist. And it's hard to eliminate pages and pages of theory, right? It's hard to write all that out and be told, well, nobody's really interested in this, and they're really not. They're interested in your theoretical insights as they revolve around something, and not necessarily summarizing all this. But those are passages that are hard to remove, but I think they do need to be removed. And it says nothing about the state of theory in the academy. It's more about a writing style. Being told chapter 2 is the best chapter, the narrative and arc found there should serve as a model for the rest of the chapters, doesn't mean to erase all the rest of your chapters and start rewriting all of them again. I think I give you this piece because I started doing this at one point, and I realized I kept rewriting every time. I kept starting from not blank page, but starting over every time I got a report back. And that's not productive, and nobody's asking you, can you produce an entirely new book? So, and I was talking to Courtney about this, your editor's there to actually help you read these, and don't go into them completely blind. And I think sometimes I did that, and other times I called up Ken and ranted and worried, and he helped me see what was going on. So don't introduce new theory in the conclusion doesn't mean explain why you are going to introduce new theory in the conclusion, and then proceed to introduce new theory. I mean, you guys are just like, how did you even get through this process? But these are some of the things that I did. And I guess all in all, I wanted to say that I'm really happy with how the book turned out, and I can't imagine, like, these people put actually so much care into the manuscript, and that's what it is. I mean, there's no reason, as Courtney was saying before, it's not like they're being paid large sums of money to do this, and there's nothing, they're not reading your book so that they can get back at you or make sure you no longer have a position at the university. They're there for you. And so the more and more I look back on it, it was quite a generous process and a nice process of exchange. And criticism isn't saying no. If we think back to my first comment, it wasn't like I'm being told no to. This is still, this is a process. So, and I would also say that I think your editor actually understands the integrity of your argument better than you might and better than anybody else does, or sees what it is that's so unique in the book. And so they help you navigate like what you should change and what you shouldn't change based on that. And I would say they sometimes know this more than you do. And so I don't think most of the time what I've seen is, even if my reports bothered me or made me feel, it was more that I had so much work to do. Not that the integrity of my argument was being compromised or that I was being asked to do something that would, like, in the end, I'm being asked to do something that makes this better. So I think for me, it was a process of tempering those reactions and realizing what's going on here. So I'll leave it at that, but we'll talk more after.
You go next, or you want to?
You want a bat cleanup?
Sure.
All right, I'll go next and leave John to bat cleanup. I wanted to thank John for the introductions and also on behalf of the Center for Faculty Excellence, just express our appreciation that you're all here and reiterate what John said, which is that we, the IAH and the CFE, are really interested in understanding faculty members' needs and how best to satisfy them. So do take John up on the offer to be in further touch with us about all of this. So that's my CFE director hat, but the hat that I actually sort of wanted to wear just for the couple of comments I wanted to make was not even as a UNC Press author, but for the last, I guess, 4 years now, roughly, I've been the chair, excuse me, I'm a member of the Board of Governors of the UNC Press, and I'm the chair of what we call the Manuscripts Committee. I think that's what we call it. Is that what we call it? I think that's what it's called. Anyway, we'll call it that today. Yeah, we call it that today. So the Board of Governors takes an active role at the UNC Press, and I think this is true at many university presses, in the ultimate approval of projects for publication. So as the chair of the Manuscripts Committee, my job is to read and then present to the board all of what we call the dockets, which is to say the individual dossiers that have been prepared on each of the manuscripts that's coming up for publication at one of the 6 times a year meetings that the Board of Governors has. And typically there will be between 10 and maybe 16 or 18 dossiers or dockets on the agenda. And each of them consists of the full back and forth history that you just heard about. That is to say, the back and forth between the readers and the author, as well as if the book is going to appear in a series, typically there will be a letter from the series editor talking about the position that this particular manuscript has in the series. So I've got a few years now worth of looking at these back and forths, and I thought maybe I could just share a couple of sort of big picture observations that I've had seeing all of these come in front of my eyes. Those would be, and I'm going to try not to duplicate much because the number of things have been said, but certainly for folks who are working on their first book, the willingness to distance one's understanding of the project from the dissertation is huge. And the more effort, both physical and psychic, you can put into the idea of making the clean break from the dissertation, even perhaps before you even approach the press, the better. One of the handful of recurring points of struggle that you find between reviewers and authors is getting authors comfortable with the idea that they're not writing their dissertation anymore, and that they really, really need to leave that behind. It comes up over and over and over again. And a lot of that has to do with, as has been said, stepping into a comfortable position in taking command of the narrative, taking command of one's own narrative, moving away from and being both willing and unafraid to move away from the mode of feeling that one needs to be in conversation with every person. Ultimately, you're trying to have a conversation with your reader. That's really the person you're trying to converse with. And that person probably isn't going to be terribly interested in sitting there and watching you talk to someone else. So the more you can do, the earlier, to get yourself out of dissertation head and into that space of comfort with taking control of a narrative and deciding what it is you want to say, what's your voice, what your contribution is, I think is really useful. To put that a different way, I have very rarely seen manuscripts faulted in the review process by readers for insufficient in-school conversation. Very rarely. And in the instances in which I've seen that, it almost invariably comes off as petty and idiosyncratic. That is to say, one very rarely sees two readers saying, this person is insufficiently engaging with the literature. If you see it, you usually see it from one reader, and maybe 6 times out of 10, one of the key people with whom the author has been in insufficient conversation is the reviewer. That's not what you're faulted for more, and what you see more is not the person didn't do enough shop talk. It's that the person didn't do enough narrative. The person didn't put themselves front and center. Again, that's just another way of, I guess, saying the same thing. You might hear, I actually wanted to say, I agree absolutely with the ultimate conclusion that you reached about the review process. One of the things that has been most gratifying to see as the chair of this committee, rather than as an author, is to see over and over and over and over again how the review process improves manuscripts. Over and over again. I've been there as the author, like, what do you mean? Oh, I should say more about X, or I'm saying too much about Y. How dare you say that? Well, on balance, they're probably right. And there's no question that every single project that the UNC Press Board of Governors approves is immeasurably stronger at the conclusion of the review process than it was. Now, we're not seeing the tears and the frantic emails and everything. We're seeing the discourse that takes place at the level of paper, in letters between the press and the author, and between the press and the reviewers. So I know that there's more that goes on behind the scenes, but trust me, you can trust the review process. It may be hard to do, but it will improve your book measurably. You're probably going to hear something from John about the continued validity of what John likes to call the long-form argument. If I've heard John talk about this, and I'm guessing you'll hear. And I actually just wanted to drop a little footnote to that. No, it's just the tiniest little footnote. And that is to say that my experience doing these manuscripts, so these dockets over and over again for a few years, is I'd make the case for the medium form argument rather than the long form argument. Because and this is just so mundane, but length is a constant battle between readers and authors. And it just seems silly and petty, and it's not. It is almost certainly the case that there is space in whatever you've written to lose, something between 1/5 and 1/4 of it. No author likes to hear that, and yet it's true. And invariably, authors, by the end of this process, come around to the idea that their slimmer tome is a better one than the bigger one that they thought they absolutely had to write and couldn't survive without. So the more you can do ahead of time to think about what can safely be left on the cutting room floor, I think the happier and the easier a review process you're going to have. So the medium form argument rather than the long form argument might be the objective. I want to just say a brief word about the importance of your relationship with your editor. Editors are wonderful people who work extremely hard and are erudite and knowledgeable and have spectacular contacts in your field or in related fields. And the way that you get along with your editor is, I won't say that it's outcome determinative, but it is nearly that. I would say that the prospects that you have to find a strong relationship with an editor and a press where you genuinely feel that the press has made a place for your work in their list, and a sensible place, the more you feel that, the better argument you have for throwing the kind of standard elitism of the academic press pecking order to the winds. Obviously, there is a limit to that, but prestige matters, but it matters more at different points in one's career and less at other points in one's career. And so I think that the sense of welcome and the sense of sustained, warm engagement that you have with your press through principally the person of your editor is ultimately at least as important as, if not more important than, the name that's actually on the spine of the book. And I can say that from personal experience, having published at in some respects, I think, at least marginally, conventionally, more elite publishing house with my first book, and then with UNC Press, which is maybe, compared to my first publisher, one teeny little notch down on some conventional pecking orders. The experiences were like night and day, in the sense of being just outstanding and fabulous with UNC Press, and less so with the first one. And then finally, and here I will stop, there's a lot of anxiety about, and I think John, this might be a little warm-up act for John, there's a lot of anxiety about the change that digital publishing and the brave new digital world is having on the viability of the university press as a business, as an economic enterprise, but also on the question of what the book is, and is there a future for the book. And my strong sense of that, although I would defer to John on this, is that authors really shouldn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about that. It's very easy to freak yourself out about that, very easy, and ultimately not the kind of thing that authors, that's what these guys should be worrying about, but that's really not what authors, there's always going to be, I think, a place for the work that we do. And I think that there will always be a need for a curating function. I don't believe that we will ever become Wikipedia. I don't think that the work that we do will ever become fully Wikipediaized, if that's a verb. So there's always going to be a need for curation, and what we should be worrying about as authors and as faculty members is we should be worrying about our work. The only tiny little amendment to that I would say is that if you're in a field where bringing your materials to your readers might be made possible through electronic dissemination. So my work is mostly sort of history and legal history. I do spend a lot of time in archives. Well, it probably makes sense for me to think as I'm doing my work about how I'm preserving my materials so that they might ultimately be capable of being incorporated into something other than something that looks like this, right? Beyond that, I think that there's just no point in my worrying about what the ultimate product is going to look like. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so Eric's right. I am worried about this. I guess what I want to do is something a little different, which is talk about some of the pressures on the industry and some of the strategic things that I've been thinking about since I've been at UNC. So when I was at Basic, we were worried about two historic disruptions happening. So one was everything associated with the economic collapse of 2008, which affected everybody who was in a cost recovery model like we are. And then the second was the shift to the digital formats for books. And I always tell people that each of those separately would be a once-in-a-lifetime challenge to deal with. And the fact that they're happening at the exact same moment, and not surprisingly, they're related to each other. They're accelerating each other in a way. At the very least, it makes it the most interesting time to be in publishing, but it's also an extremely challenging time. So I knew when I came here I was going to have to wrestle with both of those things because they're not unique to trade publishing. But I didn't realize that I would also have to worry about things like diminishing and unreliable support from the state, competition from free online upstarts, an inability to consistently articulate its value proposition, a preoccupation with defending itself against the accusation of being a gatekeeper of knowledge, and confusion over the incipient digital tools at its disposal. That's the industry that is university press publishing. So on top of just these tremendous challenges that I saw when I was at Basic, you've got these challenges as well. So there's two ways I'm thinking about these challenges. So one is to talk about the impact that digitization is having on our revenue and our business model, because I'm not sure it's completely clear, but we are a cost recovery model. We recover 93% of our expenses, and the rest is supported by the state. So we run a business, and a lot of the things that we worry about are things that people in business worry about. So that's obviously sometimes a contradiction or tension with what's happening in the academic world. But we're shifting slowly and not completely. And I was telling Mark, my colleague, this morning that sometimes I've drank the Kool-Aid on this and I get a little excited. But we're shifting from a model where we used to sell an individual unit one at a time. So we took one of these, and you gave me a credit card, and I gave you this, and you gave me the money. And so what's happening is this is being aggregated and disaggregated almost at the same time. And so we have these new digital models that allow us to sell, for example, you may have heard of JSTOR or Project Muse. So these are academic library wholesalers that allow us to sell a whole category of books. So you're a library in the Ukraine and you've got some money and you say, I want to buy a Latin American studies list from JSTOR. And so you buy 40 titles, and 6 of those are UNC Press books, and JSTOR collects a fee, and then they break it all down. They give us some after a bunch of commissions come out. So that's one way that we're seeing revenue. The other way is the taking apart model. So I just met last week with a company called Academic Pub, which is part of a bigger company called Shared Book, and they are the digital course pack, which I know is something you're curious about. So they ask all the publishers to chunk that great word, to chunk their books and to make each chapter available separately, provide separate metadata description of each chapter, assign a value to it. And so that when you are creating, the course pack that Courtney was imagining for all, first year literary studies courses, that you actually could go and build it yourself. And then you can share that with a colleague that teaches at Stanford, and you say, hey, look, this is what I do. And he says, oh, that's good except for this chapter. I'm going to make my own and get rid of that chapter and put in something else. So that's the other method. So and digital makes all of this possible. So what's happening is we're starting to see a migration in our revenue from the transaction where we sold one of these in its complete volume into, like I said, either aggregated or disaggregated, depending. Then you've got things like the PDA model in collection development for academic libraries. So that's patron-driven acquisition. So 10 years ago, if you were a good academic library, you said, I'm going to buy every book in literary theory that Duke publishes, and then suddenly you had no money. Well, you're a private school, never mind, it's a bad example. But if you had less money, you said, well, I can't afford to just put these books on the shelves and keep my fingers crossed that scholars are going to access them. Wouldn't it be great if we had a model where we didn't have to pay any money until the scholar actually accessed the book? So it's sort of the survival of the fittest in monograph publishing that is well underway and I think is going to really take hold. And the monograph is an interesting vehicle. And so to Eric's point about the long form, and what I mean long form, I mean more than 140 characters, more than I mean, 250,000 words. Mark would kill me if I advocated for long books. The monograph is under great distress. So as I was saying, on the demand side, you have the academic libraries that just can't afford to buy as they used to be able to. And then on the supply side, you have the digital humanists who are saying, what's so great about the monograph? And so, questioning its role in promotion and tenure. And, I don't know where that train starts and finishes. I've been in the scholarly world, the academic world now for 6 months. And so I'm not ready to weigh in about whether the monograph is the singular best form for promotion and tenure. But I will say, to Eric's point, that I think the text is a uniquely powerful format. I think it drives scholarship, and it drives people to do research and thinking, sort of a longitudinal thinking that they wouldn't do otherwise. So I am a big advocate for the text. So the other thing that we're trying to do, in addition to wrestling with these different format and revenue changing models, is to try and grasp the digital shift that's happening in scholarship that Eric alluded to. And for us, digital tools do allow us to do a lot of things much more efficiently, and that's a very positive thing. And we publish all of our books as ebooks when they come out. That's great, but we're really just getting started. Our new challenge is to be better partners with scholars who do want to bring some of these multimedia tools to the publication event. And I think one of the things that we have to do is expand the definition of publishing and say that we're no longer simply waiting for the Microsoft Word file to arrive so that we can clobber it and send it back to you. We actually want to build tools that allow us to integrate seamlessly some of these ancillary materials into the text. Now, this is actually going to be a huge challenge for authors and for editors, because if you still believe, like I do, that the narrative form of the text is a great vehicle for preserving and presenting scholarship, you can't send people down blind alleys, and my high school English teacher was down the primrose path send them out and let them explore some great digital tool, and suddenly they're playing with this digital tool and they've forgotten that they wanted to buy your book at all. So there's going to be a real skill, I think, editorially and for authors to figure out how to use these tools, because just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. And editors, as a couple people here have pointed out, have always been in the business of saying, no, that's not relevant. This is not a useful addition to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think with a whole new universe of potential tools, I think we're going to have to be even better at that, which is to say, we find in Latin American studies that a digital timeline is really useful, but interactive bibliography doesn't mean anything. So we're going to learn sort of best practices and things like that, and hopefully we'll be able to apply them. So we're going to be pushing the envelope at the press. I'm very excited about the prospect of doing this. The trick is not disrupting what is an august 90-year-old institution that publishes 100 new books a year and plays, in my mind, a key role on campus, because we are not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But I want to be on the leading edge of this, and I think it's achievable, and I think we can do it right here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So that's my rah-rah speech.
Thank you so much. So we'll open it up now to questions, comments, anxiety.
My question is, if you're going for dissertation and book, how much to revise not before the text? How much put into that process?
It can really vary from project to project. I mean, there are times, I will say, when I've spoken to somebody when they've just finished their dissertation, and I look at the dissertation, and there are times when I tell them, no, come back to me when you've revised. I'd say as a general rule, you should at least have done the first pass of revisions, in reshaping the book into the way you imagine it, as book rather than dissertation. And that means for most people, identifying, the main argument, the thing that you recognized at the end when you were sitting in your defense. You're like, yes, that is what my book is about. That is right. And that truly is the process of writing a dissertation, right? I mean, it is a process of discovery. And it's not wrong to end that process by recognizing what you really, really wanted to do, what the intervention truly was. So I think for most people, it's taking that insight and reshaping the manuscript so that it foregrounds, that insight and really lets that argument drive the book. Usually when somebody's done that first pass of reshaping, that a book is ready for external reviewers. Like I said, it really does vary, and you can start a conversation with an editor at different points in the process. You don't want to compromise yourself perhaps by starting a conversation too early when you're not ready, and you might not be representing the project in the best light. But on the other hand, I sometimes speak to people, off and on as they're going through that revision process, and I'm hearing about the project and giving them feedback, along the way, and it can be very useful, to kind of have that conversation before they do the work. So I'm sorry, that's a kind of hazy answer, but it really, I think, as Sarah kind of said, it just differs from person to person when you'll be ready, and when you're ready, when you have the opportunity, and when you'll be ready to have a conversation with an editor, and how an editor is going to view your project at various stages.
Well, most of those conversations that you started with people that have just finished their dissertation or beginning their revisions, have those turned into conflict later, or?
All manner of directions, yeah. I mean, there are many people that, I had conversations with them and they continued on, and then I got the manuscript and it went out for review. There are people where they strayed in a different, direction, or when I saw the revised version, I, realized it wasn't for me, or it wasn't for the, for the press. But I don't think, it's not a bad idea to get to know who the editors are in the area where you publish, and to figure out what they're interested in, and what the presses are doing, so that you can really be aware of, like, okay, what is each press kind of interested in, what direction are they going in, where might my work fit, vis-a-vis each press. I think that's good. That's just a good self-education for anybody.
I think there's also pressure, I don't know if it's happened on this campus or happening on this campus, to make dissertations available open access. Mm-hmm. And so I know it's happening on other campuses, and it's in general a popular thing because it increases accessibility, but it really does raise the burden for authors, because now it's not just the possibility of somebody digging through and potentially finding your thesis online. We know it's going to be posted in a very clearly organized portal, and I think people who are ready to make that leap have to, I think that the bar has been raised higher about clearly saying why the book is different than
I always assumed that the book is going to be so far
right
from the dissertation. I mean, it has to be,
right,
for so many reasons.
Right, otherwise we're just a printer, so, right.
Let me just say that it's 10 years ago now. Elaine Maisner, who's an editor at UNC Press, published in Perspectives, one of the journals of the American Historical Association, a wonderful little piece called Getting Published by a University Press. And I actually brought a bunch of copies along with it. If you want one, they'll be up here afterwards. But she actually addresses this question in there, so I thought I would just point out that in addition to the points that have already been made, she notes that most editors prefer not to send unrevised manuscripts out to readers for review, because they assume that those readers have their own crop of their own students' unrevised manuscripts that they're already having to read. And so that right there is a reason that Elaine cites for some initial healthy amount of spade work in, she doesn't say this, but the way I think of it is sort of giving the dissertation a once-over and at a minimum focusing on these questions of your own voice, what your narrative is, and stripping it of some of the most screaming outward signs of being a dissertation, so that it's something that could conceivably be sent out.
And I think, maybe Sarah can speak a little bit, since she did go into the review process at that earlier stage, but, I often tell people, I try to start the review process when I think it's going to be most useful for the project. And that usefulness can be early at the dissertation stage, Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's like, you know, you have to do all this stuff. Just do it. Like, don't waste reviewers' energy and time and goodwill as well by forcing them to tell you to do what you already knew to do, you know, what to do. On the other hand, there can be times when, you know, getting something out for review early will really help to shape a project in a very exciting and new way, and it can be really useful to have that input at an earlier stage.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what had happened. It was sort of a bit of a surprise, so, because I was in just contact, I had been in contact with Ken, just a conversation had started, and he's like, oh, it could go in this way or this way, and we kept having this kind of conversation, and then he was like, well, I think I should just send out, if you're starting your proposal, and I'd done a first stab at revisions, but it was still it was very much dissertation, and he thought it would be actually more helpful at this stage to send it out, rather than me do a whole revision with one set of, like he thought. So it's precisely what you just said. So again, it's a different story than other people, but that's how it felt.
I think the moral of this story is start talking to editors early, and you develop the relationship, and then the editor will be the one who will decide or help you decide where to go. Go ahead.
I had a question about ebooks. You mentioned that UNC Press is putting every title out in ebook form as well as hard copy. And is the ebook form a kind of an ebook that you can download, like say onto your iPad, or is it an ebook that resides in the university library and you can access it?
Both. So when I was talking earlier about, you know, articulating your value proposition, when we produce an ebook, we have to produce 5 different digital files because each kind of main vendor requires, you know, Apple likes a Mobi file, Amazon likes a EPUB file, the library wholesalers like a universal PDF. So we take, you know, essentially the printer PDF and we do all this massaging to it, and get it ready for what each kind of proprietary vendor wants. If the UNC library has it though, it's because they bought it from either probably from, actually I don't know if the library is using, I think the library is using Project Muse. I think they bought some ebooks from us. There's a lot, it's very, very complicated about which way libraries are going to go in terms of using which vendors. It's all kind of like the Wild West. We're trying to figure out who's good and who's not good. But the library does have it, but it's not because we gave it to them directly. And one of the really confusing things about the book business is that we know nothing about our customers because we rely on, you know, Amazon is our biggest customer, and you can imagine they don't tell us anything about their customers. That's how they make their money, is by holding that information in a proprietary way.
So what kind of a relationship do you have with Amazon? They come and order something and either
Oh, you mean a specific? They meant like a tone, I think. Right.
Basically, you have no.
So they are both our biggest physical book vendor and our biggest ebook vendor. So when we publish a book, we distribute ebook files to all of our. It's basically a file that we give them permission to license to their customers. Right. It's one of the great items of confusion about ebooks is that when you actually have it on your device, you don't own it. You have a license to read it through their platform. That's the little 1,000-page agreement that only people like Eric can get through that you sign off so readily on. And then they order physical books from us twice a week, big trucks full of books, and we send them that. So.
And Duke similarly sells, electronic books, individually through Kindle or on iBooks and all the other platforms, as well as we have our own library subscription plans. So Duke has a fairly large journals division, and we learned a lot from them because they moved, very early on to electronic production and sales. And we learned pretty much what John said was, one of the biggest distinctions between our books and journals divisions is that our journals division knows exactly who they're selling to. So they can call, we have an eDuke package, which we sell to libraries. They can buy individual books or they can subscribe to our books by season. And they can call the librarians and talk to them, well, why did you stop subscribing? Or do you want to subscribe? They can have these conversations with them individually, and that's, in the book business, much more difficult to do. We talk to you know, our authors and talk to them about how they're purchasing books and, you know, what they're doing. But we can't like call up each person and say, why didn't you, you know, why did you buy this book? And would you also like to buy this related book? That's what Amazon does. And
No,
you know,
Amazon says, would you like to buy this related outdoor grill? Right. Is what Amazon said.
but I think that, you know, we're actually in the process of integrating our books and journals content on the same platform, and you know, doing a lot of what John was talking about in terms of thinking about the content as a group, and so that somebody might want a chapter from our book and an article from a journal, and might want 3 or 4 things that they want to assign to their students, and that they would want to look at that all together rather than thinking of journals and books as completely separate entities.
Your comparison of books with journals is very interesting and apropos of our conversation today because, you know, 5 years ago, I don't think anyone would have predicted that hard copies of journals would be practically obsolete, and they pretty much are already. And I have a hard time getting my students to actually even go into the library. They are like, why? You know, I can just sit in my dorm room and have access to almost everything. And so you see them citing journal articles all the time, but rarely an edited book because it's a little harder
to access.
get.
It's coming. It's coming.
From
It's
their
coming.
dorm room computer. But so the whole question of really how much longer will the book be around? I know that some people suggest, well, there's just something about a book that makes it different from a journal, and that people still want to have books. But
I think-
I'm wondering if that's just
Yeah, my feeling is
nostalgic.
books will be around for a while, and my feeling for a long time has been it's really, we're seeing not a shift to a new way of doing things, but a proliferation, right? People want to be able to access this, you know, this information in a lot of different ways. They don't want to be circumscribed to one way of having it only in the book or only, you know, this e-version. We have lots of people who want to own the book and have an e-version, right? So when they're traveling, they've got, you know, anthropologist or somebody, you're in the field, wouldn't you love to have, you know, your library kind of available to you? But you might also really, you know, have books that you want to sit there and underline, and you might actually want to own it in both ways, or you might want to have the hard copy but the e-version of 2 articles, you know, that are particularly meaningful to you. So I think that we're not really seeing a narrowing, but rather a widening of a, you know.
Yeah, so think about some of the other industries that have transitioned. So journals is a great example of an industry that went lightning fast to all digital, and yeah, good luck finding, you know, a physical journal. And think about, you know, LPs to CD, about how kind of, I mean, yes, there's a kind of a small fringe LP market, but it's like, you know, it's a little nutty. Books, it looks like even on the trade side that for nonfiction, 25% of the market is digital right now, and there's no reason why if it wanted to be 100% it couldn't. It's not like there's capacity issues or the books aren't there. So we seem to have hit this steady state where it looks like you know, the numbers are kind of not skyrocketing anymore. And for scholarly books, it's much less. I mean, it's more like 8, 9, 10% of the business is digital. I do think the monograph business could conceivably go much more digital, because the monograph, as I was saying earlier, is just under tremendous distress. Just the economics of it, I mean, even in the salad days, was not great. And it's possible that if university presses could figure out a way to really much more efficiently publish in a kind of digital first way, that books that are being accessed, you know, maybe not in a, like, I'm going to start on page 1 and finish on page 250 type of experience, that those could migrate even more. And there are capacity issues. We don't yet have the business partners who can help us shift that model, but I think that's coming. I bet you 2 years from now we sit here and, you know, the monograph business could be 75% digital, whereas now it's probably like 5%. So.
I have a question about edited volumes. That's probably mostly for the editors, although Eric, you also have other people's essays and publishing. Because I'm interested in editing a volume, and I've been talking to people about the different ways they do it. And like, I recently got asked to contribute to a volume that was already under contract, and they sent the prospectus with the, we're hoping we'll do this chapter. And I go, I look at the prospectus, and the chapter
In fairness, it was a book about chutzpah, though, right?
And so, I mean, the obvious advantage to that is he got the contract and he's asking people to contribute to something that's already under contract, which makes it more enticing, but I don't think I have the nerve to do that. Then, I've also seen you do the call for papers, you get all the articles, you say, this is what I think you should do, they revise them, then you go to a press, then they get readers' reports, then they have to revise them again, then the readers say, this is fine, except we hate the ones by Smith and Jones, and the editor says, take Smith and Jones out, and Smith and Jones are furious, because they've revised their work twice for you at that point, it's been 2 years. So it seems like there are real problems either way. And I also know somebody who got the contract sheerly on the basis of people's abstracts. So the contributors didn't have to produce anything except a 1-paragraph abstract before getting the contract. Do you have thoughts as editors about if you're going to take on an edited volume, what you like to see and what the pros and cons of different approaches are from your perspective?
I don't ever want to do it based on that story you just told. So I've been there 6 months. Mark's our editorial director, and he may have a better sense, and I think he's probably been down that path before.
In fact, you're laughing because I actually, before I came over, the phone conversation I was having was with a prospective editor who's thinking about an edited volume. And so sort of went through the litany of things. No genre of academic writing is harder to publish because, edited volumes are very important in certain fields, but the challenge for us as publishers is because of this ability to aggregate and disaggregate at the same time that John was talking about, the market has fallen so precipitously that they're just very difficult to publish successfully. So, yet scholars keep wanting to do this sort of collaborative work. And so I think part of the challenge for us as editors and publishers is to figure out some alternate ways to do that. But in the meantime, what I always tell any editor is, first of all, that the sum of the volume has to be greater than its parts, and that you have to have a team of contributors that's signed on to that plan from the outset. I do edited collections for one of 3 reasons. They are designed from the outset because they're useful for teaching. In other words, they really occupy not just a week in the syllabus, but a big chunk of the syllabus. 2, that they are trying to catalyze a field that's trying to emerge, or that they're trying to sort of sum up and move a field in a new direction. Now, if I have an experienced senior scholar and a group of contributors that are similarly well established, have a track record, I know what they're up to, and I can see from basic proposal and from kind of preliminary table of contents, I'm willing to signal strong interest at that point. I wouldn't be ready to offer a contract unless I had seen a proposal and abstracts of every piece. And I'm stunned and amazed by the experience that you described. It's really amazing. But I think if you're beginning now, I would start with that idea of do I have a whole that makes sense? Why does it need to be a whole? And do I have a group of people that I think are going to be partners in creating it? And if you've got that much, then you've at least got enough to go have a conversation with an editor about whether they think they can work a process. I think more than just about any other kind of book that we're publishing now, that initial discussion with the editor is really, really important because there is more back and forth between what do we want to see, how soon can we make a commitment, what's the revision process going to look like. So I think that's also really important. I don't know if that answers your question.
I want to get Heidi's question, but Courtney, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Mark said. I would not advocate the fraud version of making up contributors. And I don't think that would be possible, from my perspective, because I would demand to see abstracts at the very least, which hopefully the person had written. And I would be upset as an editor to find out that had happened. But I will say that, doing an edited collection can be a real slog. And that 90% of the time afterwards, an editor says to me, I will never do that again. Although they often come back and do it again. So there is something to be gained from it, clearly. There are a lot of cautions about putting together edited collections, and the bar has certainly gotten higher and higher. But we have actually had some very successful collections in the past few years for the very reasons that Mark was pointing out, which things that are truly there are often ways in which fields or areas of studies come into being. Right before people have written books, extended arguments there, you have people who are thinking and having these conversations and writing about it, and it comes together and often, is kind of starting something, spurring something on, and those can be, collections that people just want to own or they want to teach in order to kind of, have a conversation about a field that's emerging. But most certainly it has to be, we're looking for collections that are very well conceived, where they are actually doing something, where the introduction manages to put forth an argument on its own, and some of the very best collections, the introductions to those collections get quoted as regularly as the articles within them, because they're making a major statement. And then as editors, collection editors have to be very much, they have the bird's eye view of the project, and they have to continually craft the project. So we have all these individual contributors who are doing their own thing. You have to tell them what to do so that the volume is coordinated, rather than just allowing each person to go in their own direction. So it really requires a lot of orchestration, a lot of feedback, a lot of comments given by the collection editors. Not just by the reviewers. You don't want to wait for it to go out to the reviewers to start to find out that, like, oh, this volume's really uneven, or not everybody is actually talking about the topic of the collection. You don't want to wait for that, because you will end up with a collection that gets mired in the review process very unhappily.
So I want to get Heidi's question. Is there anybody else I should put in the queue? Okay, good. And then we'll take these 3 questions, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for food in the back and mingling and chatting. So go ahead, Heidi.
I wanted to follow up on something Eric said, but I imagine the rest of the panel might also have things to say, which is the importance of a really good relationship with your editor. I imagine that I'm typical in that I'm I'm emailing with people I've never seen. And, things seem okay, but on the other hand, I'm very happy to be emailing with them. They might have to be actively toxic before I noticed it wasn't a good relationship. How far in do you get before you pull the plug if it's not looking like a good relationship with the editor? So I guess my question is, what are the things that you look for, especially early on? Because, again, I would imagine by the time you get to contract stage, it's a little late in the day to find out that you're not working well with your editor.
I'll mostly let others answer that, but I mean, you can, by getting to conferences and stuff, you can actually meet, at meetings, you can actually meet, people, or if you have reason to be in their part of the world, or they have reason to be in your part of the world. I don't think there's any replacement for a face-to-face meeting with somebody that you're going to be working that closely with on something that's that meaningful to you. That's all I'll say.
I'd also, I don't know, it's a case of are they into you or not? Like, do they respond to your emails would be one thing, I think, right? And the tone, I don't know the tone of the emails, but I think the response, like, and there's some enthusiasm so that you feel, I think they'd be conscious of the fact that this is an online relationship and they'd show some enthusiasm for you. I think so. Yeah, like my emails were always, I benefit obviously from even being able to hand deliver stuff to Duke, which is really fun, and I got to meet Ken, but it was the email, most of our exchange has been online. Like we rarely saw each other or would meet in person. It was all online, and it was, email exchanges were warm, and even signed warmest would be a good indication. But I think they show enthusiasm. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and
How do you write to people?
I've had wonderful, warm, and productive relationships with authors who I've never met, and would love to, but sometimes it's just not possible. But yeah, I think you should. I mean, just like any other relationship, you can tell when there's a good rapport and when you're getting good feedback, when you're getting the support that you need. I think the editor is your advocate at the press, and I think that's really important to remember. So you should feel like because they're the person you're going to work with throughout the process, and I think this was a, really true insight that like, you really do have to feel comfortable with them. They're going to be helping you to shape the book, and then they're going to be representing the book to the press. So the rest of the press, they're going to be the ones who go to the board meeting and, and advocate for the book there. They're going to be the ones who, sit with the marketing department and explain the book and explain what is so important about the book and how the press should be getting behind it. They're going to be the person you go to later on when something's wrong and you're like, you want to complain, and then they're going to, they're going to follow up on it. So you should feel like they're they're that kind of advocate for the project, as well as somebody who's helping you to develop the book along the way.
I guess I'll just add, when you're doing your homework to figure out who you want to be edited by, one of the things you would always do is see what kinds of books this person has produced. Because my guess is,
How warm do you call
my guess is that every author probably, I've never written a book, which is like one of the great joys about, I can just say what authors think, but my guess is that every author has had a moment in the process where they just wanted to grab their editor and throw him against the wall. And I would just say that, be careful to not be precipitous in those moments, because I used to have this editor at Basic who was enormously challenging to her authors, and I would, as the publisher, I would get the, like, she's made me crazy. Oops, I gave away a clue. This person's made me crazy, and I'll never work with her again. And then at the end, there's this big hug. It's this wonderful thing. It was like childbirth. I'm sorry. It was terrible while it was happening, and I'm so glad that it happened. So just, make sure if there's a bad day, I'm not sure you cut them off quite that quickly, and so you have to think about. What's their track record? How have they collaborated with authors, and what types of books have they produced? And maybe it's painful to get there, but sometimes the relationship is not always joyful. I mean, you guys are kind of pointing fingers at each other and saying, "This is how I think it should be. This is how I think it should be," and back and forth. It's tough, like marriage.
So I think what we'll do is take both questions and then let people. So go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that was just a simple question in terms of setting around a perspective. Should you be going to presses in a kind of serial manner, or should you take a sort of scattershot approach and send prospectuses kind of everywhere and see what happens? Is there a preference one way or the other?
Okay, let's get your question.
Yeah, I would probably just echoing that. Being in this position that I'm kind of overwhelmed, frightened about the entire process, transitioning the dissertation to a book. I'll keep talking about establishing this great relationship, and this will be incredibly naive question, but I want to know how to. Do I just, as you're saying, send out a bunch of emails and hope, or do I harass someone at a conference? What's the most respectful way?
One thing I'll just say, not to truncate anybody's responses, but these questions are actually something that Elaine Maisner talks about in this piece. So come on up and grab one of these. You might get a tip or two from that.
I'll say a few things and maybe we'll want to step into. But in terms of simultaneous submission, for most book publishers, that is acceptable in a way that it's not for journal articles. But it's good to be upfront. So when somebody sends me a proposal and it says, I've sent this to several presses or whatever, you know where you stand. Okay, this is out with several presses. Or somebody will write to me and say, I am sending this to you first because I feel like this is the ideal home for my book, And then okay, this person's really, like putting it out there, saying like, are you going to say yes or no? So I think it's good to be upfront about that. Once an editor has offered to send a manuscript out for external review, then things change. So I, for example, especially with first books, don't have any problem with a manuscript being out simultaneously at different presses, as long as I know about it and the author is going to give me a fair shake. That they are going to wait for me to get the reports and think about all their offers together. And I think that's especially important for a first-time author, people who are under tenure pressure, who don't have the luxury of just kind of waiting to find out and moving on. But there are other presses and other editors who don't feel that way at all, and will say, no, if I'm sending it out, it's just me. And so you have to, that's where you have to make your decisions, and just be upfront and honest with everybody. Mark, did you?
I would agree with you.
It's not harassing people to go to the conferences.
Oh, that's. Do you want to say how you met?
I don't know. I didn't even
You
know.
remember that?
It's either going to be the letter of inquiry or it's going to be meeting people at conferences.
That's one of the big reasons they're there, isn't it? I mean, isn't the whole point?
Yeah, we
to-
spend a lot of money getting editors to conferences
Yeah.
for those kind of serendipitous moments. So
It's always best, find your list of your top 3 or 4 places you really think you can see your book having a home, and then, try to establish contact by email before the next big conference in your field, and say, hey, I'm going to be at the meeting. If you're going to be there, I'd love to meet with you. And expect that the editors might not have more than 15, 20 minutes for an initial conversation, but if they're interested in the topic, they'll make that time. I mean, that's why we're there. That's absolutely right. And I think, if you're prepared to say what your argument is and why it matters and for whom, you're ready to have a conversation with an editor. Even if you're still revising your dissertation, in some cases, even if you're still getting ready to defend your dissertation. If you can answer those 3 questions with some certainty, then you can have a pretty good first conversation with an editor. But yeah, we're there because we want to meet you too.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And I reiterate the writing ahead of time as an important thing to do. I mean, it depends on the meeting for me, as to whether or not I'll be just completely booked well in advance of the meeting. There are other meetings where maybe my list isn't, as extensive, and I'll have spare time. And if somebody comes up and, just starts chatting with me at the meeting, it'll be fine, and I'll be able to make some time for them. But often that's not the case. And, it's not good to try to corner somebody who's very busy. You won't get the best audience. Let's just put it that way. And so I do think it's good to try to set up those meetings ahead of time. And, you can talk to your colleagues and mentors and find out who they've worked with and who's been, who they've enjoyed working with, and get some recommendations from them as well. That's always a good way of kind of finding out who's who. And then things like this are also good ways to meet editors.
So there's obviously plenty more to talk about. This recalls me that on February 28th, Gordon Huttner, who is the editor of American Literary History and is also now editing a series for Oxford University Press, will be here. And the conversation will be about journal editing, but also he can talk about academic publishing too, since he's going to edit this series for Oxford. And I have to admit, I can't remember if that's going to be here or over at the English department. But anyway, I'll get information out about that since we have all your information now. And then please do tell us what you'd like us, meaning Eric and I and Maria, and so we need to do next to help you. And join me in thanking our panelists. No need to run.